Hey there, welcome to another episode of Raw Green, a show produced by Obi, a sustainability consultancy specialized in life cycle assessment, research, and green techs. Learn more about us on oneobi.com or take a look at our pages on various social medias. Links are ready for you in the description. Ciiiao! I am Francesco De Lieto. I am passionate about sustainability and green technologies. Welcome back to a new episode of Raw Green. We need to talk more about energy efficiency. Let me repeat, we need to talk more about energy efficiency. Across continents, there is a wide range of issues with energy generation, whether they are technical or political. This makes energy efficiency technologies even more strategic, as they can deliver immediate savings to users while reducing the strain on utilities. Utilities that, by the way, are already under the double hammer of century-old grids and the surging demand from data centers. Our guest for today is Thomas Clardy, founder and CEO of PowderWatt, who has developed an energy efficiency technology with the potential to save as much power as the entire US solar energy production. Thomas, welcome to Raw Green and thank you for being here. How are you today?
Francesco, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. Doing great. It's a good day with a news cycle to own an energy company. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. So for those unfamiliar with your technology, could you please explain what kind of problem we have here, what PowderWatt does, and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. We managed to find an area in which no one had innovated in the energy efficiency, energy saving space. And we figured out how to apply some pretty wonderful energy efficiency metrics and standards to save on the amount of energy consumed by, and here's the kicker, what turns out to be, as far as we can tell, the largest unmanaged electric load left on the US grids. And it was literally out of sight, out of mind. And so hopefully, all the listeners, viewers today will have the same experience that we had, that you and I both had really, in going through learning about this. There was, up until we kind of stepped into this space, a sleepy industry that just happened to consume a massive amount of power. And in the past, no one had been able to address the power load because you don't dare turn this load off because it's a building protection system. And so that's the buildup. What is this? Well, it's what's called rooftop snowmelt. And it's called, goes by a bunch of names because it's been around for 50 years. But there's this existing big electric load that's out there that's always running. And sometimes people call it heat cable or heat tape or just snow melt. I've even heard heat trace. All these things are
de-icing cables,
general name.
I've heard too.
De-icing cables is a good one. And it's a general name for this thing that people have been putting on their roofs for 50 years. And you might say, like I did, why would you have this on your roof? And over the course of several years, I've learned it's not because it's fun to have on your roof. It's because if you don't have it for these particular geographic locations, you get big leaking into your roof and roof damage and roof collapses and these sort of things. And so because of that, in these snowy areas, people have been putting this, de-icing cable, as you put on there, or snow melt, heat tape on. And that's fine. It actually works pretty well. The only downside is it consumes an enormous amount of power. And just to give you a benchmark for how much power, the circuits are usually hooked up to either a 20 or a 30 amp breaker at 240 volts. And they just run all winter long, consuming vast amounts of electricity. No one has applied any efficiency to them, except in the 1980s, somebody came up with an idea of, hey, why don't we put a thermostat somewhere in line so that they won't run in the summer? As they set this thermostat to 52
that would be
degrees,
fantastic.
IECC. And other than that, and some units have them, some don't. The thermostats cause a lot of problems, so a lot of electricians recently, because of these problems, have not been using those even. So because of that, these heat cables will sometimes run straight into the summer if somebody forgets to turn them off. So it's this massive electric load. It's interesting. The people who have snow melt know that when they turn on their snow melt, hopefully in the fall, late fall, beginning of winter, their electric bill either doubles or quadruples or quintuples. So people, commonly we'll see people, just regular homeowners, and of course this is on buildings as well, but regular homeowners, commercial buildings as well, but regular homeowners, their bill will go 3, 4, 5, 600, 700. If you have a big house on the ski mountain, you can have $1,000 plus electric bill.
Wow.
Just to run this snow mountain. So it's a real pain point for people. And it's also a real tax on the grid. So that's why we came in to say, hey, no one has addressed this. We might as well do it. That was a couple years back.
Nice. How do you come up with the idea? I mean, how first of all, how does it works? How does it make it more efficient?
So I'll tell you, to entertain everybody and not just give you the standard answer, I'll tell you, if you could only train squirrels or chipmunks to be able to operate a walkie-talkie, a little handheld radio, and they could report back conditions on the roof, and they could say to you every morning, hey, you should turn these things on. There's a lot of icing going on up here underneath this 4 feet of snow. Or they could say, hey, we're living in this, beautifully created snow tunnel. They've melted off all the melting to be done. You can shut it down for now. And because we couldn't figure out a way to train the squirrels or chipmunks to report back this information, we decided to use Internet of Things technology. And so the funny thing about these little heat cables, so I'll describe for everyone if you haven't seen them. If you type in heat cables or heat tape, you can look them up. Again, weird, you would think small niche. Turns out 20 to 27 million buildings in the US, so not a small niche. By far the largest consumer of electric on the building that they're hooked up to. So we spent all this time like running around chasing LED light bulbs and putting in Nest thermostats, which are wonderful, to try to squeeze out a little more efficiency out of our furnace. All the while, these things were just burning huge amounts of, like 1,000 times what an LED light bulb would burn. And so how we came up with it was we said we had to discover even the concept that these don't actually have to run all the time. Some people knew that, some people didn't. But then on top of that, what was unknown, completely unknown in the field of science, and this is why we received the patent, was the fact that once these heat cables have melted out a snow cave, once they've done all the melting they can, even if you're standing on your roof in the middle of winter with 4 feet of snow or 6 feet of snow, or even just a foot of snow on the roof, you can't see down in to see if these cables have done their job. And their job is simply, it's not to melt all the snow on the roof. The job is simply, because they can't do that, the job is simply to melt enough of a drain channel to get new water that's melting, or on a sunny day, or due to energy leaking from the building up, to the roof, melting the snow, to get that new water off of the roof, because nobody's roof is a swimming pool, right? It can't just hold indefinite amounts of water. And so, to answer your question on how we came up with this, it was really the discovery of being on the roof and saying, hey, these heat cables have melted all the snow and ice they can possibly melt, and they're still running. They're doing it for like weeks at a time. And so over the course of time, funded by the National Science Foundation and others, we figured out the correct approach, and really the only and the best and only approach, to give you as a building owner confidence with a system to say, we can see visually with computer vision, and we give people an app. Here's the conditions on the roof. Here's the melt channel. Here's the safe space between the ice and your snow melt system. And to be able to then say, with that confidence, you can now say, oh, I see new snow and ice forming, I better turn them on. Or, geez, these have done all the melting they can possibly do. We should put the system into standby mode and wait around for more snow and ice. That's kind of the core of the invention, is using computer vision to do that. There's a lot of back end, including making switches that can automatically do this, putting in utility calibrated energy into the switches so that we can show the actual savings. I'm sure we'll get into all that in a minute here. So
yeah, because those data are literally the proof that the system it is working effectively, generating all those savings. Let's talk for a sec. We will definitely go into that because it is very interesting. But what I wanted to ask you, it is,
Yeah.
okay, you founded, you started PowderWatts, and we're talking about just for the US. You were mentioning a total addressable market between 20 to 27 million homes that can be affected by this, or where actually your system can help to optimize and save energy and money out of it. What are the primary barriers that you see in the, let's say, the widespread adoption of this technology? Is it cost? Is it awareness, or something else?
Yeah, I think about that all the time because our job, of course, is to one, help the building owner, whether it be a homeowner or business, lower their bills and then get insight into, hey, is my system actually working or not? And then help them automatically control that over time. And, but our job is also to the US power grids because we can contribute massive benefits to the power grids. And we're seeing that in right now we're talking almost every single day to the Department of Energy, working
Yeah,
on this, and
I
certainly if
can
you
imagine.
roll in utilities to that, we are every single day talking to utility advancing this. And so, biggest barriers to widespread adoption are one, we're brand new in the space. We invented this space, so we're exactly where I like to say as an analogy, we're exactly where Nest thermostat was,
Mm,
when in their first, year or so of launch. Like, hey, there's
yeah,
this new smart thermostat out there. It's really very convenient. You get an app and it saves you energy. And by the way, it'll let you know if something's wrong with your furnace or air conditioner. Um, and for the first year or two, kind of HVAC technicians were figuring out, hey, how do I install this? What happened to my? And
yeah,
you'd hear from some of the more slow adopters would say stuff like, and we're not facing this problem now because Nest has really paved the way, and anybody who is an absolute dinosaur is, kind of now become a believer thanks to all the other Internet of Things. But a couple of things that were required for adoption there were, the HVAC installers that were putting in Mercury
hmm,
thermostats or years ago, or programmable thermostats from Honeywell and others. They had to learn to use a new smart thing. And you had the normal adoption things where, well, I don't know if this is right for this or that. And then eventually, over the course of 2 or 3, 4 years, kind of everybody got a Nest, and then it just
yeah,
utilities stepped in and said, "Hey, this saves energy, so we're going to rebate it." Same thing's happening for us. So one is awareness, and the second is price. Everyone's price sensitive. The nice
yeah.
thing that we have going is that we pay back extremely quickly. In fact, other than the LED light bulb, we've done a white paper analysis on this, sort of a meta analysis of all energy saving technologies. And the LED light bulb, if you believe it actually lasts, 20 years, uh,
Yeah.
like the box
No,
says.
they
I haven't
have
had
eight.
that
Was it
experience
eight?
myself, but
It's 8,000 hours. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, we pay back very, very, very quickly. And here's the reason why: is that these systems went from no regulation to a smart system all at once.
Mm,
So Nest has a couple year payback time, right? Like, I don't want to speak for Nest, but I'm going to say, looking at their website, it looks to me like a 2, 3, maybe worst case scenario, 4 year payback time, depending on how much utility incentive is in there. And they took your furnace that was already only running when it had to be, or your air conditioner only running when it had to be, and they made it a little bit smarter. They said, hey, if the building's not occupied, we're going to squeeze out a little bit more efficiency by not quite taking it to your target temperature there, and et cetera, et cetera. I think everyone knows the
yeah.
smarts of Nest, but we had the luxury of taking a system that was completely it's like, imagine your furnace just ran all the time, and in order to regulate the temperature in your house, you would just have to open the windows. That's what these things are doing. They're just running all the time. And so, because of that, the first couple of years of data when we were doing this, we were at a 92% efficiency over baseline. And then as we rolled out the fleet, we now are seeing more and more customers. And so some of them are above that. And even just the lowest customers are really kind of in that 70+% efficiency.
Wow.
So imagine it, like, I don't know of
That's huge.
any, this would be a fun question for the listeners, actually. 2 or 3 Earth days ago, we put out a question: can anybody else name a technology that went from 0 to 70, 80, 90% efficient in the first pass? And the answer was,
Lighting.
well,
Yeah.
the only thing we can think of is
Yeah.
the LED light bulb, but
Yeah.
that took 100 years of constant innovation.
Yeah.
Um, And so it was a green space that was just wide open for innovation. And so I think now, to circle back, on, hey, what's required for widespread adoption? It's really utility support. LED light bulbs, how did they get there? Well, from utility support. They were all subsidized, in the States by utilities lowering that price for entry for customers. Nest thermostat, how did it? Same thing, utility support. And that really means two things for us. One is a customer incentive and a rebate. So the utility says, hey, we'll pay for 70% of this, you pay for the other 30%, or we'll pay for 50% of this, you pay for the other 50%. And then the second thing really from the utilities is, as you can, and this gets into more technical stuff, and we can talk about that a little bit, but what is a virtual power plant? And hopefully this is probably a great audience to get into the details on that, but that's another way.
Go nerd. Don't let anybody stop you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll get in right now. So the Department of Energy, I think, honestly, is doing a pretty awesome job at trying to figure out what are we going to do in this current state. And I'll get into that in a second. But first thing I'll point out is, for the first 100 years of the grid, we had the luxury of saying, hey, there's a demand for energy. So we're going to build an infrastructure for transmission, and we're going to build generation. So we had the first two pillars, generation and transmission. And we're going to meet the demands for energy, and customers will pay for it, and it'll all work out. We're going to, there's a lot of capital equipment costs, which, are very large in the beginning, but don't worry, we got 30 years, 50 years to pay for those. And that model worked wonderfully well. We've somehow wound our way into a situation where, as we just saw earlier this week, the U.S. says we're in a national state of emergency on energy. And, we've been saying this for a couple of years. You and I have been talking about this for a couple of months, and then now finally it's in sort of the public awareness, and I believe it. And the reason I believe it is this: you can always slow down the adoption of electric vehicles. You can slow down the switchover from gas furnaces and gas ranges to electric. You can slow that to meet the needs of the abilities of the grid. But what you can't slow down, what you don't dare pump the brakes on, is the AI beast. And there's, and for, like you said, for months we've been saying, hey, this is a real national priority here. You can't dare tap the brakes. And the reason why is the moment you even pause and think about tapping the brakes and feeding the AI energy demands, we lose the race. And right now it looks like if we lose the race, it looks like China will win. And there's a big part of the world that would rather not have China, win that race. And so it's another space race. In fact, we were just in USA Today, USA Today publication. If you Google USA Today and PowderWatts, is an article about the new space race, and that this is that, and that the number one holdback is energy. And so the utility companies have been seeing this. The Department of Energy has been seeing this coming. Just for the last couple of years, really, because we always thought, well, we could tap the brakes on the EVs, we could tap the brakes and we could balance the grid. Now we're faced a real challenge, and that is you can't tap the brakes. And so what do you do? And
there is an unprecedented
China's answer
pressure on this.
Yeah, it is. It's a neat time. I like the challenge.
Urgency, this sense of urgency behind AI that in the space of 12, 18 months took precedence above everything else, because obviously of this potential, untapped potential to be discovered yet. Totally. I don't know how it was the race to the moon in the 60s, but this feels something with unprecedented pressure on this, with everything that comes adjacent with that. So the energy consumptions, the environmental effects that this unprecedented pressure it is generating. To give you just one figure, Microsoft, basically they were close to reach the 30% scope 2 emission reduction targets before investing into OpenAI, target that as of now it is absolutely impossible to reach for them, since the surge in energy consumptions that they're having because of AI. So it is mind blowing. It is absolutely mind blowing. And last week I was at a convention, and I was talking about with this company that develops data centers, and what we've witnessed with the renewables, especially with solar, where you have distributed generation. I think it is something that will come at a certain point. Also, the equivalent in data centers, where you will have a grid of data centers. You will have the hyperscalers. Likewise, you have the 1 gigawatt solar farm or wind farm. But at the same time, residential units can play a role, or small farms can play a role as distributed data centers. Likewise, now I am not a data center expert. I just think logically, for the simple rule that you don't put all your eggs into one basket, also security wise, you don't do that. So your technology that it is able to implement the concept of virtual power plant or home to grid or microgrid or the name literature here, it is abundant. It is, I think, of strategic importance, not just from an energy savings perspective and also environmental saving perspectives, but also for the future needs of this artificial intelligence. So, if let's focus for a second, if you don't mind. We go back to the virtual power plants because they are very, very interesting. What I wanted to ask you it is, if for a second we can talk about, let's say, the climate change and adaptation. What I mean by that, it is climate change. It is driving more extreme weather events, right? Whether they are heat or cold weather events. In agriculture, for example, large vineyards, they are buying a chunk of lands in the northern region because they predict that in 10, 15 years, the same atmospherical conditions that they benefit right now to make their beautiful wines are going to be translated upwards, northward. So what I wanted to ask you is, do you think that in 10, 15 years, there will still be the need to use heat cables in certain areas where right now obviously are needed, and how this can affect PowderWatts?
Yeah, we think about that all the time. And you know who else is thinking about it is Vail Corp and Altera Corp and Boeing Corp, the three largest ski holding companies. So you mentioned the agricultural production, maybe even citrus production, fruits production, and what are they doing to try to hedge risk and bets, and we think about that as well, actually. And what we just saw a foot of snow, I think, in Florida yesterday and today, and so you certainly see, and in fact, 2 winters ago was the most snowy winter on record in all of the Wasatch area of the Rockies. And many of the Rockies just had a spectacular year. We broke all-time records. So we don't, as you know, with the climate change, it's a change, right? It's sometimes you see more and maybe sometimes you see less. Following with interest the fact that the East Coast, the lower East Coast, so Washington, D.C. up through till New York, has received in the last couple of years less snow, whereas the California mountains and the Rocky Mountains and Minnesota, they've received, in some cases, record-breaking snow or as much snow. So will the use of heat cable go away? I can answer it this way. If it does, that means we're 15, 20 degrees warmer than we are now. Not tenths of a degree, but degrees. So that would be really bad. Yeah, let's hope not. I would like it to go away. It's an imperfect solution. This heat cable, this heat tape. It's an imperfect solution to a roofing problem. However, these millions of structures that are out there with heat tape on them, they have tried many other things that have all failed over the course of the years, and that's why they're willing to pay a couple $100 to $1,000, or if you have a very large house, in case more than $1,000 a month in electric just to protect the roof, because they've tried other things and failed. And so people would say, why don't you just add more insulation? Well, sometimes that works a little bit in some roofs, and it doesn't work enough. In some cases, it doesn't make any difference. And people will say stuff like, why don't you use cold roofs? And I'm a huge fan of that. I think that's a great idea. What are you going to do with the 160 million buildings already in existence? Are you going to rip all the roofs off? Not all at once. Maybe over the course of 50 years. You might try an approach like that.
It's a different kind of intervention too. More intrusive, more intrusive than just.
And environmentally, the cost is huge. Yeah, because you're huge cost in materials and lumber and fuel to do that. So actually, by making this snow melt system smart, probably the number one thing to do is not try to go use all the lumber and building materials and fuel to do that, but instead maybe just make them smart. All of a sudden, if you can get them 90% more efficient, then geez, that solution looks a whole lot smarter. So that's, and then coming back, you asked also about the virtual power plant. That's the third pillar. So we were talking a little bit about the history, and that was we've been very fortunate to have demand keep up, or supply keep up with demand. And supply means two things. One is generation. The second thing, it means transmission. You got to get it there. And so now there's, for the last couple of years, very intelligent lady at the Department of Energy named Jennifer Downing wrote what's called the VPP Liftoff Report. And everybody who's watching the show will probably enjoy that read. It's a great read. Make sure you get the latest version. Virtual power plant used to mean many, many years ago, hey, can we just cobble together solar and batteries and try to, at disseminated locations, and try to make a grid resource using that? And that's still part of virtual power plant. But the real focus has gone to, everybody's already doing solar and batteries. What can we, and both of those, especially batteries, is incredibly environmentally intensive. Like getting a hold of lithium and making a meaningful amount of batteries is not at all even remotely free. Also, it's incredibly lossy because this is something people should pay attention to. The solar panels produce energy in DC, which is then in many cases converted to AC and then converted back into DC for these batteries. And in all cases, converted to, basically stepped up or stepped down to charge these batteries, which is a lossy process. There's quite a bit of loss in charging a battery. And then you got to discharge the battery, and then you got to convert it to AC, which is also lossy. And then you got to transmit it, or at least a little bit, to where you're using it, which is also lossy. So this, they really compound. Like if you actually take an honest look at the losses they're substantial. And I've got solar and batteries in my house, so allow me to point that out with all humility. I'm still doing the same thing. So we do what we can, right? We try what we can. But however, what's not lossy, what has really virtually zero loss, is to say really what the virtual power plants are doing now. And that is saying, hey, where can we find behind the meter, meaning in the building or in the house, energy savings? They call them DERs, or distributed energy resources, where somewhat significant amounts of power can be one of four things. And so these are the four pillars of the virtual power plant that Jennifer Downing, I think, coined at the Department of Energy. And that's shape, shimmy, shift, and shed. And so shape, shimmy, shift, and shed. Check out the virtual power plant. It's very interesting because there's a lot of action to be had here. Both the generation and transmission need to be sized for peak load. And if they don't make peak load, then you get a brownout or a blackout. And you've seen this many times. So what does it mean if we shift the time of usage of a load? Well, EVs are a great example of that everyone can understand. And this is already happening over the past couple of years. There's been, and it's useful actually, because EVs are a very large draw when they're charging. So what they do is you plug them in when you come home at night, but then that charging doesn't necessarily really start in earnest until the peak on the grid has passed. Meaning most grids peak from say 4 p.m. to 10 p.m., somewhere in that region, most of the time. And so if you can shift that charging cycle and say, well, that's when you're plugging in your EV, but that's not where we're going to draw power in the grid. We're not going to contribute to that peak. So we'll do it kind of in the middle of the night sometime. And if you're a really smart utility operator and you've got a VPP partner that's willing to work with you, you can say, we'll even stagger these. So we're not charging all of our EVs at once. We're trying to, that allows you to bring down or spin off or not use as many peaker plants as possible. And peaker plants are a big contribution to pollution. So what we found obviously was this always on load. that was really contributing to the base problem of the grid. So also in that peak window. And so one of the things we can bring to the Department of Energy, we can bring to the national grids, we can bring to your local power company, we can bring to your transmission infrastructure and your local substation is saying, not only are we not burning these at all the time like they were before, but we're also able to shift that time of usage. So if you see a little bit of snow, you see a little bit of ice, you can melt that kind of whenever you want to, right? You can say, well, do I need to melt that between 4 and 10 p.m. or can I wait till 11 p.m. or can I wait till midnight? Yeah, you can easily wait. Or can I do it in the morning when the sun is shining? Yep, that's a great time as well.
Well,
and so
you have
if you combine those
optimization
together,
systems. Yes, exactly. The combination, you have those optimization systems based on weather patterns, peak cycles, production cycles, utilization that can be optimized to generate that required or optimized level across the grid from production transmission to the final end or the third pillar, like you call it, of the VPP, the distribution part. So yes, totally. The thing is, there is still a gap in awareness onto that it is massive. I didn't see a particular push at the regulatory level. I don't know that well the US market to say, okay, they haven't done anything, but I'm very keen to read this paper from the Department of Energy that you just mentioned, because it sounds an interesting read to do about it. What it is unmistakable, it is on the energy savings spectrum. It is on the emission savings. Now, I read your white paper, the one that you prepared, and we're talking about a potential savings of almost 90 million metric tons of CO2 annually, which is an incredible number. It is a lot. This is due to, let's say, a number of facts. First and foremost, because the US grid, generally at national level, it is not the cleanest on the planet. Now, I don't know region by state by state, but I remember Florida, for example, has a very bad and polluted transmission grid, which I remember was around 500 to 700 grams of CO2 equivalent emissions per kilowatt hour, while the UK, for example, it is 200. France, it is between 70 grams to 90 grams because they have 80-90% of the energy coming from nuclear. So while in lots of states in the US, there is a predominant of natural gas and of coal still into that. So what I wanted to ask you, it is, there is this huge potential of savings of CO2. Does that translate into a carbon offsetting potential for PowderWatts as well?
Yes, it sure does. Someday maybe our energy will be extremely low carbon, and don't forget all, I always like to say carbon is so important, but there's also all the other pollutants that come along, in that entire chain, like all the way from mining all the way down. So we should think about that. But it's interesting that the math works out that our average home, and there's plenty of businesses too, but we like to think about the businesses in home size units. So it helps, illustrate the scale. The average home, I think, is about 8 metric tons of carbon are spent running their heat cable per year.
Just the heat cable.
And yeah, just the heat cable. Yeah, it's about, it's quite a bit. So when you think when you think, well, can you save 70, 80, 90% of that? Yes, you can. And I think, before the National Science Foundation got involved with us, and the National Science Foundation is a really neat, it's the world's largest and most prestigious science organization. And they do a lot of due diligence in the problems. And so I was really excited when they first contacted us, because I said, well, you're going to help us figure out, how big of a problem really is this in the nation and the grid. And one of the interesting things was, and this is the reason we have this opportunity, which is neat, is that heat cables don't require permits to install. and they're not usually installed at the time of building
Love it.
construction.
Yes.
And because of that, those are the two ways that the national energy labs usually capture load. And they're not an appliance. So if you're not an appliance, you don't require a permit to install, and you're not installed usually at the time of building. How is the National Energy Lab supposed to track this? And so they really largely hadn't, which is why I guess this opportunity, presented itself to be solved,
Beautiful.
here and now. Yeah, so it's an interesting point. But when you come back to carbon and the National Science Foundation, I think that's one of their big things, right? Their mandate is do well for the American public, right? Do that. That's their goal, and they made that very clear from day one. There's some really, really smart, hardworking people there that I think. One thing I can say, kind of as an American taxpayer, is that having worked with the organization, I'm very grateful that they're out there doing what they're doing, because they've got everything from advanced micronuclear that are moonshots, kind of the Hail Mary approach. Like, I hope we can get this done. Well, maybe fusion's more in the Hail Mary approach, but micronuclear, we think we can get it done. But, a lot of work, 10-year kind of horizons. So they're involved there, and then they're also involved in what can we do right now for this national energy emergency. So that's kind of neat as well. But looking at the U.S. electric mix, yeah, it's not great. And when you think about, hey, what is a metric ton of carbon? Like, what does that look like? And then you think about, well, it looks like what you might think, and it's not great. And there's a lot of other pollutants that come along with it. So offsetting even one of those would be per home would be spectacular. So yeah, we're glad that that's a benefit. And the nice part is, because we have energy, you might say, okay, there's a couple of ways to address the carbon. One is like sequestration. Like, what can we do to help the planet absorb more carbon? Well, I think that's a wonderful effort. The planet is doing a lot of it already on its own. Helping that is probably smart, but there's another way. Another way is like, hey, just don't belch that out into the atmosphere to begin with.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's where we are. And in order to quantify that, you have to be able to. Thank goodness we put an energy meter in every single one of our switches. So each one of the smart switches. So there's the rooftop monitor, which is the exciting portion of the system that people think about, right? That's the computer vision part, looks at everything. And the cloud and the back end of the app. But the workhorse is this smart switch controller that turns things on and off as needed, as commanded by the cloud, and that has energy monitoring built into it. And so because of that, you're able to then say, okay, well, here's more or less exactly how much energy, and we utility calibrate these as well, so that it's really very precise. Here's more or less exactly how much energy we offset, you cause not to be consumed. And then, here's the utility mix, and here's what that would have looked like carbon-wise. And so when it comes to carbon credits, I mean, that's one of the highest quality carbon credits you can get, because it's verifiable, quantifiable, and measurable.
Yes.
And
well done.
And the utilities co-witnessed and co-logged our data. And that's one thing that maybe listeners or viewers might not appreciate, because I didn't, and that is, utilities are putting in a tremendous amount of work and have been incredibly supportive, not just to us, but to many, many, many technologies to try to save energy. And we should all take a moment to step back and say, here's the only industry in the world where they get paid to cause their customers to use less of their product.
Yeah.
Think about that again, right? The only industry in the world that I can think of, I'm sure there's others, but one of the only ones, and maybe the biggest, where they get paid to cause their customers to use less of their product, which means less revenue for them.
Yeah, incredible.
And so, there are benefits to utilities, right? Like being able to, there are financial benefits to utilities, but it is interesting to think about. And, Rocky Mountain Power, Holy Cross, San Miguel, Tri-State Energy, like they have whole teams working on this, which is neat. And so, because what they do at those couple utilities, right, it impacts millions of customers and kind of sets the standard for, how we're going to move forward in this third pillar of the grid, right? No longer do we have the luxury of this unlimited generation and transmission. And in fact, that's a fun thing. If maybe we can talk about what Microsoft's been doing and the data centers, because there's a lot of interesting data center.
On the carbon offsetting and carbon credit generation, I think that in the realm of the one generated from avoidance of emission, which energy efficiency technologies are into, I think those are the most valuable one. probably, not probably, it's probably scientifically as well, even more than the one generated from renewables. There is, from a life cycle perspective, you still have those emissions to build the power plants, whether it's solar, wind, geothermal, and whatnot. You have the OPEX, so running cost and emissions during the operation, and those carbon credits from renewables are something that they are under the realm of avoidance, but in reality, there is still an emissions. In fact, if you see what is the carbon intensity, the grid intensity of renewables, we're talking about 15 to 20 grams for solar, arriving up to 40, 50 for wind offshore, grams of CO2 equivalent emissions per kilowatt hour. With the energy efficiency technologies like the one of PowderWatts, but there are others, you have that initial impact. And from there on, it is just avoidance. There isn't any more addition of emissions onto that. And like you said, it is measurable, it is verifiable, and it is quantifiable. So it is from a transparency perspective of that single carbon credit generated from an energy efficiency project, the quality, it is so much higher. And it is very important because all climate accounting needs to rely on more accurate data to be able to track better the result, to track better the efforts that lots of businesses around, lots of private people, lots of governments are doing around the world. It is those quality data that makes the effort even more valuable at the end of the day. So I think in the realm of the avoidance, energy efficiency technologies should have a premium in terms of the carbon credit price, for sure. Not as
Totally.
much as
I agree. And the embodied carbon is so low.
yes, it is. It is. You have technologies where you have carbon sequestration, where they are, let's say, more artificial, like direct air capture, carbon capture and sequestration, or utilization and whatnot. That they are still very important, but they're still, ironically, now it's a few years that we're talking about those. But the net drawdown, it is still something that requires a huge initial capital, environmental capital investment. And it has likewise a solar or a wind power plant has those operation OPEX, environmental OPEX throughout its life cycle. They're quite important. So the net drawdown, again, it is something that I don't think it is as big as something that it is so amazingly simple as energy efficient. And like you said before, it drives me insane. You don't need any permit to do energy efficiency implementations in your homes. You don't need anything. You don't need to get a building permit. You need to get any authorization. You just do it, which drives me insane. No paperwork. People, no paperwork. How's that sound for a compelling solution?
Yeah. And when we're working with the Department of Energy, they talk about NEPA, which is, making sure that, you're not causing accidental environmental damage, or just undesirable associated environmental damage with, whatever energy project you're doing. And for like easy example, hydroelectric, right? Like, well, let's think about the downstream consequences of damming, and even solar farms, right? Like, well, what's going to happen to the ground when you put a massive solar farm in there? Maybe it's nothing. It's never nothing, right? Because we're scientists, but maybe it's okay and no big deal. Maybe there's some unintended consequence. And then one of the nice things about energy efficiency Internet of Things, IoT systems, is there's like, you don't have to wait 10 years for zoning and permitting, or grid interties and hookups, and you don't have to worry about NEPA. Well, I mean, certainly you need to be sure, but it's not some big NEPA study. And the embodied carbon in devices themselves, we went through a calculation of what that is, right? Because it's important to figure that, what does that cost footprint? Department of Energy, work we're doing with them, requires that. And These are our numbers, so the Department of Energy hasn't validated those yet, but it's something like the embodied carbon payback is like, I don't know, like a day and a half or something like that. So you
Yeah,
install
yeah.
the system, and in a day or day and a half, um, that embodied carbon was saved by the system, and that's, usually it takes a lot
What's in
more
the
than that.
system? You have
So that's just
the
kind of neat.
camera, you have the back end
Yeah, yeah, it's
system.
just little Internet of Things
I can give you
devices.
an LCA here on my feet. Let's do one quick.
I like it. Okay. Yeah, yeah. So we have the little
We,
Internet of Things camera, and
yeah.
then the
What do you
switches,
have then?
and then also the cloud
Switches.
processing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the little
You have
smart
a
switches.
PCB
The
probably inside your
Yep,
system,
exactly.
which is
Yeah.
probably the most polluting part. You have PCBs. I can give you this data. You have PCBs. They can have between 500 and even 700 kilograms of CO2 equivalent emissions per kilo of PCB. Now you don't have a kilo of
Right.
PCB into your system, but that it
No,
is
there's
that it is let's say probably the biggest component together maybe with part of the energy consumption that you have on the back end system, so the servers and everything that runs within the IoT system. Okay, so but that is quantifiable, that is totally quantifiable.
yeah.
So if you want to do an LCA of your system, what you said before, it can save something like 8 tons
Sure. Yeah.
per year per household. We're talking, yes, days. This is my final estimation.
It's kind of
Days.
funny, right? It's like the math is beautiful. It's
Yeah,
beautiful math.
yeah.
I love the math. And one fun thing is, so part of our team is made up of former NVIDIA C-suite members. And NVIDIA is doing a lot of computer vision. And so we put to this team and said, hey, help us understand the amount, like what you were talking about with the servers, the amount of energy that we use for our computer vision cycles, including the processors and the data and in and out and everything. Let's benchmark that and compare that to the amount of energy that's saved. And what I want to know is, is this an example of AI producing more energy savings than it's using? And well, clearly the answer is yes, like hands down. But for our computer vision cycles, right? But here's kind of the math. Since we're doing about one picture an hour, it's not like streaming 4K video in computer vision. It's not like what's going on in the Tesla or driving down the road at 85 miles. No, we're just taking one picture an hour from each one of these things, and because each one of those circuits is consuming thousands of watts when they're on, many thousands of watts when they're on, and so even like basically something like a billionth of a watt that it takes to do that processing, that one little computer vision cycle. And that's getting lower all the time, actually, with the more efficient processing, via NVIDIA and other chips. So Jensen, if you're listening, this might be the most biggest bang for the buck. So here's the question. With that billionth of a watt that it takes to do that computer vision cycle, and you're returning many, many, many thousands of watts, that's a multi-billion magnitude change.
Magnitude, yes.
So what's it? We've attempted to do the math there, and it always comes out, literally many, 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 many thousand x time. And so then the question becomes: is there any other use of AI or computer vision that is that the threshold is that large, the magnitude is that large? And we did delve into this. And of course, and also where the opportunity is big. It's not just like a one-off. Like this is a humongous opportunity. There's something like there's probably more than 140 terawatt hours. So not megawatt, not gigawatt, but terawatt hours of energy, wasted on these snowmelt systems. And that's just the rooftop. There's a lot of other verticals as well for us to go into. And so then you say, well, if I could shave, half of that, let alone 70 or 80 or 90% of that, that's a spectacular success, especially when the amount of energy used to do it is this tiny little bit of billionth of a watt, or less.
It's a staggering low number.
Kind of that's a neat, fun thing.
Yeah.
And then the question then the question for Jensen becomes, where else can we do this, and how quickly can we get on the grid? Because you piqued my interest with data centers, and there's probably saw the $500 billion data center or AI initiative. AI requires three things, everybody: the code, the chips, and the power, right? Those are the three things. So the code, well, that's going very well. The chips, well, again, thanks to Jensen, good job on bringing some of that TSMC manufacturing stateside, Arizona and others. That's fantastic. Well, now we still need the power. So energy, I'm not sure if folks know this or not, but in many parts of the country, available hookups to the grid are 4 years plus out, in some cases even longer.
That's a very
some
good
of
point,
that is
Thomas.
very, very, very far out. So what are you going to do? And then the second period of that is where are you how do you transmit that power? And so what PowderWatt brings to the table, I think this is really neat. And hopefully, so Jensen did one more thing. He put basically a data center in a box, a liquid cooled data center in a box, which I think is brilliant. And I personally think that's absolutely the future, assuming that that's performing well, which I don't have any data on, but I think it is. I haven't heard anything bad. Assuming that's performing well, these liquid cooled data centers in a box, they allow, here's what PowderWatt does. This is really our fun opportunity where we can support the nation. As we bring on like 100 to 200 homes with PowderWatt on them, somewhere in that range, it depends on the heat cable size per home. That's why there's a range. That gets you a megawatt under management. And a nice data center starts at 50 megawatts. A great data center is 200 megawatts. Or sorry, 100 megawatts. And a spectacular data center is 200 megawatts. So let's just think about 50 megawatts. So if we go and put PowderWatt on all the homes in Park City, Utah, then all of a sudden you get, 50 megawatts or more. And then you go to the local substation there that was transmitting that energy and you say, okay, well, we just took 50 megawatts off the grid. Now we're going to put in a liquid cooled AI data center feeding off of that same substation. And there's no lines, no waiting. Like the only waiting is how fast can we just go get these sensors deployed, which, if you've got a good effort behind it, like extremely fast. And so, hey, that's just one snowy mountain town. What about all the others, right? What about Minnesota? And it goes on and on and on. And then the fun thing is with this liquid cooled, not only are they super dense, by the way, these I think I have my facts right here. Listeners, feel free to check these. One of these little chest freezer type size, they're drawing about a third of a megawatt. So call it 300,000 watts, right? So I think they're already kind of looking forward to the megawatt in a box, looking, one chest freezer size. And so you put 50 of those, or even as it is right now, 150 of those into a room. But, it doesn't take a huge building all of a sudden and then you liquid cool them. And then here's the key. You do something useful with that heat. You don't spend more energy just to send it in the atmosphere. You actually use it. And so and in a mountain town, in cold, you can use that all year round. So all of a sudden you've, doubled the efficiency of your data center or better, because all that previous waste heat is not waste heat now, it's useful heat. Yeah. And that's where PowderWatt is going. That's what we're doing. And we're very lucky. The governor in Utah, Governor Cox, over the summer, I think it was, or late summer, had a plan for data centers in Utah, even before the federal government announced such. And he launched what's called Operation Gigawatt. And one of the tenets of Operation Gigawatt is, well, we need capacity on the grid. We need data centers to stay competitive. We're home to I think at one point it was the largest data center in the world, the NSA data center in southern Utah. So we have a long history of this. And however, we cannot do evaporative water cooling, which is the most, except for, thank you, Jensen, the data center in a box, truly liquid cooled. Evaporative water cooling was the most efficient way to cool a data center. But in Utah, most of the state's a desert. We don't have any water to spare. We can't do it. So this approach that we're doing with PowderWatt is really the key, not just for our town, but for, I hope to see it, because it's so incredibly efficient, because it already works. It's really the key for massive rapid scaling. Now, that being said, I'm sure there'll still be the Microsofts of the world that, they're restarting TMI, 3 Mile Island, abandoned nuclear power plant, abandoned in 2019.
Because it's got besides the production,
spin that back up.
It's got the connection. Yeah. It's got the connection to the grid. That as it is for new power plants connections. So there is that 4 years queue. I've heard even more than 4 years queues. Waiting times. Sorry. The same applies for the new consuming consumption connections like data centers. So it is the value right now of a connection to the grid. I've read in certain cases in the total balance of the system breakdown has passed the value of project development itself. Just that. Okay, I'm not talking. It's maybe in some cases even the cost of some materials inside the boss. So it is absolutely madness. What happened in such a short amount of time. Because it is a very short amount of time. Look, Thomas, I wanted to thank you for being on Raw Green. It was a very good conversation, lots of valuable information, and I am a huge fan of energy efficiency technologies for all the reasons that you listed before. First and foremost, because you don't need to do any building permit to your local municipality, so no red tapes in most cases. And second, because it is something that immediately starts to generate returns, both financially and environmentally. So I really hope to see PowderWatt taking the market at very good pace to get more installation around. And I look forward to have another chat with you.
I love it. Yeah, looking forward to it as well. And I'll leave your listeners with this. There's probably lots of other opportunities out there. So just like this. So go find them, because together, I believe that we can innovate our way through this challenge and into something pretty awesome.
Fantastic. That's a good message. Thank you, Tom.
All right. It was wonderful talking. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Raw Green. To get this far, you must have liked it. So don't forget to hit that like button and follow our podcast. It is a great way to support our community. At OBI, we're all about research, life cycle assessment, and green tech innovation. Stay connected with us through our social media pages or visit our website. Links are below in the description. See you next time. Ciiiao.